Hello, my name is Sahibjeet Bains, and I'm an associate at Create Advisory, which is a boutique infrastructure advisory firm. And I'm also the vice chair of the Economic Society of Australia, Queensland branch, Young Economists. Today, I'm very delighted to be joined by Kate Davis, who's the office head of the Reserve Bank of Australia in Queensland. And today, Kate's going to share all of her experiences about studying economics at university and her distinguished career in a number of different roles at the RBA. So we're very grateful to have you with us today, and we can't wait to hear what you have to share with the listeners today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. It's a wonderful day in Brisbane today, and we love Queensland generally. And so I just wanted to start by asking you what makes you positive about Queensland at the moment, and what makes it a great place, just generally for the economy, for the broader state of play in the state?
Well, I always joke with my southern colleagues that we are the Sunshine State, so we've got sunny weather. We've also got a sunnier economic outlook than many at the moment. Yeah. So there's just so much going on in Queensland. We've had such strong population growth. There are businesses moving here and opening. There's a great strong outlook with their pipeline to the Olympics and all the infrastructure and the things that will bring to Queensland. There's a optimism about the outlook. The Brisbane city is becoming more vibrant. There's lots of things to do here. Having moved back after 20 years, there's a lot going on in Queensland, so enjoying it here.
Exactly, especially when you look out towards the skyline and you see all these cranes, and they talk about cranes being a sign of good infrastructure investment and great construction activity. So it's great energy in Queensland at the moment. Before we go a little bit further and delve into your experience as economists, we're going to start with a few rapid questions, if that's okay with you today.
Yeah, great.
So the listeners today can really understand what makes Kate and what makes Kate tick. So a few quick questions. Firstly, I'll start with, what's your favorite book?
My favourite book series of all time is C.S. Lewis's Narnia series. My favourite one of those was always The Silver Chair. I've just revisited it with my kids, and I've read that so many times in my life and always love it.
Oh, that's awesome. And what about your favourite holiday destination?
Probably the favourite place I've ever been to was Bolzano in Italy. It was just beautiful landscape, Italian style, German orderliness.
Yeah.
So that was fun. But in terms of repeat destinations, we've been going to Ravensbourne near Toowoomba. Lots of times it's just quiet, leafy, beautiful landscape, things you can do. So that's my repeat one at the moment.
Exactly. And it's close to Brisbane as well.
Yeah, near Toowoomba.
Yeah, short drive, exactly. If you could have a coffee with an economist, dead or alive, who would that be?
Probably Mark Carney. So for those that don't know, he was the central bank governor in Canada during the GFC.
Yep.
He was then headhunted to be the central bank governor of the Bank of England in the UK for quite some time. And now he's the president or Prime Minister of Canada. Yeah. And so that's just a really interesting intersection of leadership in a crisis, central banking and politics, bring together so many different things. There's so many questions I could ask him, and it's interesting to see what the future holds for him too.
Exactly, and there's so many skills that you develop throughout your career as an economist, and they can be applied in so many different ways. And as you were saying, he's obviously a prime minister at the moment. Yeah. And the last of these rapid questions is, if you weren't an economist, what would you be doing?
I wanted to be a social worker almost all the way through high school, but then I kind of got interested in the system and the policy environment, and so then got interested in politics, and it led me into economics in the end. So, always want to do something that makes a difference for people, but just doing it at a more macro level than a one-to-one individual level now.
Exactly. No, that's great. So I think that transitions well into the next question, which is about your upbringing, and I'm really interested to listen and understand more about what your upbringing was like. What was Kate like growing up?
Yeah. So I was born in Mackay in central Queensland, and then moved to Brisbane when I was very young. Grew up on the north side of Brisbane and went to Moorfield State High. grew up with my mum and dad and brother and sister there, and my parents were teachers, so they always valued education and encouraged me to study and do whatever I put my mind to. Yeah, I loved hanging out with friends. I was very involved in a church youth group there, which got me interested in community building and, thinking about what life was like for people who maybe didn't have quite the same privileges that I did. I loved playing the piano, designing my own clothes, although the real talent was my mum, because she was the one who would make them for me. I would just draw the pictures.
Yeah.
Yes, like hanging out with friends, that sort of thing. So I like to read,
Right.
and reading mostly was fiction, but there was always an element of politics or society or why people do what they do, how they organise, trying to understand the choices people make,
Right.
and why they believe what they believe. And then that kind of led me to thinking a lot about politics. I didn't know that those books, they always had an element of politics or mystery or something, but didn't really know there was economics in it at that time, but there was. But I guess that's what kind of got me interested in things.
Yeah, exactly. And as we were talking before we started recording this, I think, having parents as teachers, and we both went to state schools in similar areas as well. So it's great to listen to the experience of people from a broad different array of backgrounds and careers. And I think that's something that you definitely got through as you were talking about your youth group as well. And so tell me more about what the decision-making process was to go or move towards economics, and what made you interested in studying. Was it economics that you studied at university, or what was your path towards economics?
So it was eventually. So when I was in high school, my school didn't offer economics initially. And so I couldn't really get anyone to describe to me what it was. But I loved humanities. I loved history. So I studied history and legal studies, and then was interested in politics. So I went into political science first at university. But then in my first year of political science, there was an essay on economic globalization. And so I was like, what is this economics thing? And so I started to look into economics. I was fascinated by it, took a couple of electives in economics, and I was like, actually, this is really what I want to do. Because I like how economics gives you a framework for thinking through some of those political problems, the philosophical problems, the broad other issues that I was grappling with, and it gave me a little bit more rigor around it, I think.
Yeah. And did you find that as you're going through uni, as you moved through your degree, you were finding, you're seeing different things happen around you in the world, and you could apply some of those skills, and things were starting to make more sense why things were happening in the way they were in the world?
Absolutely. And that's what I liked about, economics gave you sort of a logical way of thinking through, if this happens, then what? Understanding current affairs, which I was really interested in understanding history, sort of understanding the implications of what some of the philosophy stuff that I was reading in political science, and how it might work in practice. I liked the more concreteness of economics as well, like adding in their statistics and how to actually assess if something's working well or not. So there was a practical element to it. I was always very concerned that I wanted to get a job at the end of the day. So I felt like it made my political science degree a little bit more robust and tangible, and opened up some other career options as well. So I kind of enjoyed that. But yes, it did help to make sense of things going on around in sort of politics and policy that I perhaps hadn't fully understood prior.
And did you find that your economics degree allowed you to get a taste of a lot of different segments of the economy, or different theories and different ways of looking at the world? Because it's not just one approach that they teach you in the degree, is that there's multiple different lenses that they provide you and different theories that they cover.
Oh, very much so. And economics marries with and adopts things from so many different disciplines too. So it's more just gives you frameworks for thinking through problems, not telling you what to think, but thinking about, behavioral economics helps you understand, why you think that's something true, questioning your own assumptions, thinking about your cognitive biases. That's like fascinating, and thinking about, I assumed that was true, but why did I assume that was true, etc. So there's like economics can marry in with psychology, it can marry in with politics, it can marry in with philosophy, it can marry in with tries to adopt things from the hard sciences too. One of my favourite courses, which I did in economics honours, was actually philosophy of science. So how do you know what you know? How do you know what's a good study, which is one thing, but how do you actually, know what's, what are the principles behind studying science, and how can we apply that to the social sciences, which seem a little bit softer and less tangible? But
yeah. And you just talked about honours, and honours is a great program that you can do alongside economics. Could you talk me more about your decision behind pursuing honours and what that involved, and did you do any research as part of that? And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So honours, at least when I did it at EQ, was a little bit different to undergrad, when you just do lots of different courses and you can choose your different subjects. But honours, you did have that courses work that just added and extended what I'd done earlier in terms of the earlier courses. But there was a research component too, which I was really keen to have. I mean, you do a little bit of research in your coursework, but to have an opportunity to do an extended dissertation or thesis, to be able to do some more in-depth research, independent research. So I felt like that opened up more doors career-wise, built my research skills, which have been invaluable since coming to work at the RBA. So I really, it was an intense year. I'm not entirely sure I would say enjoyed it.
Right.
It was very valuable.
Right.
I got a lot out of it. Probably was a lot of work though.
Yeah, no, exactly. I did honours as well, so that's a very relatable experience. But I think, as you were saying, it's very rewarding in the end, being able to research and really focus in on a topic that you're really interested in. And throughout your undergraduate degree, so you spend a few years understanding a range of different topics and a range of different theories, and then you get to apply it to something you're really interested in. And that, so I think that's a really good transition. So we've gone through what Kate was like in high school, and then the transition towards university, and then honours as well. And so tell me about what was next for you. Where did you end up after doing your honours?
So after doing honours, well, actually, just before I did honours, I did an internship at the Reserve Bank. We were like cadetship back then. So I spent my summer in Sydney working for the RBA, and I just intended to do the internship. I didn't necessarily realise until I did that the breadth of the different things that the RBA did. But then I came back as a graduate after that.
Yes.
And sorry, the rest of the question, I've forgotten.
Oh, so it was just talking about how you ended up, what was your next step after doing your honours? And you're talking about that being at the RBA. And in particular, it'd be interesting to hear more about what the RBA does. You see the RBA, Reserve Bank of Australia, in the news all the time, but it's interesting to know from someone who actually works at the RBA, what does the RBA do?
And I probably hadn't realised the breadth of what the RBA did when I before I sort of started to think about working there. So we're most famous for monetary policy. So the Reserve Bank's Australia's central bank, and our goal is to promote the welfare and prosperity of the people of Australia. That's what our goal is in legislation. But we are monetary policy is the main thing we get the headlines for. So the interest rates to keep inflation low and stable, and to try to maintain a labour market where people who want to find a job can find one without having to search for too long. But that's not just it. So when I started at the Reserve Bank, I started out in the financial stability department. So there's an area in the bank that looks at the stability of the financial system as a whole. So while the Reserve Bank's not regulating individual banks, we look at the banking system, different parts of the financial system, and what are the risks around that? Is it stable? Is it safe? And then we also operate the payment system. So anytime if you and I bank with different banks and I want to pay you some money, it would go through the Reserve Bank system to get to you. We need to make sure that those who want to make electronic payments can make them. So that's a big part of the bank. If the bank works on that and make sure that system functions, because if it doesn't work, everyone will know about that. We also there's a bunch of that team that tries to think about the innovations in that system as well, to make sure that their payment system is fit for the future. Because looking at central bank digital currencies, there's a stream of work and things like that. Of course, we also print paper money. Polymer notes, the bank notes. Make sure that there's the security features that they need to be in those. the Reserve Bank's actually a bank, so
Yep.
it is a bank to the government,
Right.
and so that's an important function of the Reserve Bank, so that people can, receive their social security payments
Yes.
on time. What else have I got? We've got a very large IT function as well, because of operating the payment system,
Exactly.
making sure those sort of systems are secure. And then of course, when I talk about monetary policy as well, there's a financial market. It's not just deciding the economics of deciding what should be done, but also monitoring how monetary policy and interest rates are affecting the economy. And we've got financial market teams that are actually implementing monetary policy.
Yep.
So we've got the Reserve Bank's head office in Sydney, but we've got small offices around the country, in obviously Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth and Adelaide. We've also got offices in New York and Beijing as well to be able to keep it, and London, to be able to trade in those different time zones, but also to be able to conduct liaison and talk to businesses on the ground there as well.
Yeah, I mean, from what you've said, what blows me away is the amount of touch points that the RBA actually has with the people of Australia without us, I think, sometimes knowing. And I think that can be a very good thing, that sometimes that when you don't notice things, that, it means that things are running in a very good way. But at the same time, it's so important to be able to understand that there's so many other roles that the RBA plays across the economy, and that's great. And I've heard that the RBA also does a lot of engagement with businesses and the community, and I think that's something that you are quite heavily involved with. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yep, that's my role in the Queensland office here now. So the RBA's Queensland office, our primary function is to be the RBA's presence on the ground in Queensland, making sure that we are talking to businesses, community organisations, government organisations, etc., to make sure that we understand what's happening in the economy around Queensland, as well as looking at the economic data and the official economic statistics.
Yeah.
So we get to find out why things are happening in the official economic statistics by asking the people that are actually involved. The information we gather from businesses is also very useful for, helping us to understand emerging economic issues, how the structure of the economy is changing, how, what the outlook might be as well.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, because it's so important to get different views on what's happening in the economy and different trends that are emerging. And as you were referring to below, we're in a globalized economy, and the world is so interconnected. So things move very rapidly, and the RBA has to ensure that it's proactive and responsive, but also looking at things that are emerging over time. And you find that being able to talk to different representatives from different businesses, community organizations, industry groups, really provides more of a holistic view of what's happening in the economy, rather than and complementing actually what you're seeing in the data.
Absolutely. So when the Reserve Bank's developing its view of what the economy is like, giving advice to the board ahead of each monetary policy decision, there's, a bunch of our colleagues in Sydney that are looking at the official data, do like the CPI, the Consumer Price Index out today. But there's always a view also on what are businesses telling us. What are they telling us about what's happening to demand for their goods and services? What's happening to the cost pressures? Can they get labour that they need? What's happening to prices, etc. And so we take that information, sort of aggregate it up, and then every time that there's sort of a discussion about the outlook for policy, and also when the board discusses policy, they're also hearing what businesses are saying, as well as what the data is saying, which can help us very much for being able to hear what's happening in the period ahead as well. So we take the information we get from businesses, actually quite useful for forecasting and working out both where we are now, but what the outlook is going to likely to be.
Exactly. And so I know you've done a range of roles, but across your career at the RBA, but that's really interesting to hear that as someone with an economics background, your role it can be modeling, it can be data analysis, it can be looking at policy, but it can also be having conversations with a lot of people. So that's really interesting, the breadth at which you're able to talk to people from all around the state as well. So does that mean you're talking to people from far north, west, east, everywhere really, and really trying to get an insight into what's going on in the economy, and really using your background and your skills to have conversations to gain insights that you might not necessarily get.
Yeah, so we're trying to get a good sample across Queensland, across different industries, different areas. So I'm in Townsville next week, for instance. Was in Gladstone a couple of months ago, be in Toowoomba later this year. So trying to get around and hear what's happening in different areas of Queensland. We normally talk to the CEOs and CFOs of large businesses in Queensland, but we try to get a good sample of those who have got good insights into a breadth of small businesses too, so that we've got, both from the big end to the small end. We talk to community services organisations to get an idea of what's happening in different parts of the sectors that they serve. We talk to government organisations to get an idea of what's happening in terms of their spending. Yeah. So, I'm trying to get that breadth across. So I'm in the Queensland office, but when I sit within the economic analysis stream of the Reserve Bank, and our team's actually called Region and Industry Analysis. So it gives you an idea, as well as doing that, talking to businesses. Yeah. And taking that information and feeding it out into the board and monetary policy process. We also do a lot of research into particular industry issues or regional issues that are of interest for the economic landscape at the time.
Yeah, and does that mean that if something's changing and you're noting a trend, you're able to communicate that towards other sectors of or parts of the RBA, so that they can use those insights to inform how they're responding to things and the specific tasks and objectives that they have?
Yeah. So one good example might be, a tangible example is a few years ago, well, actually it's been happening for a while, but we had a bit of some troubles with in the energy sector. We had a big spike in electricity prices, which has still been flowing through over time. Yeah. Well, when that happened, we were able to very quickly go out and talk to different players in the energy sector, work out what's happening there, and why, what the drivers were, and be able to then think through the implications of that for electricity prices, the implications for CPI, talk to the teams that are, doing the forecast for that. How's this going to flow through, etc. So that's maybe one example of where we can take the liaison, add a little bit of analysis in terms of trying to understand the sector and its structure and how pricing works there. Yes. And then pass it on to a team that's actually looking at the data and trying to forecast ahead and give them some inputs.
Yeah, and actually in the lead up to having this conversation with you, I read that this liaison process run by the RBA has actually inspired and given a lot of learnings to some of the liaison programs that other central banks run across the world. I noted that the Federal Reserve actually runs a liaison process at the moment, and they've taken a lot of insights from the Australian program run by the RBA. Yeah,
and we learn a lot from them too. Yeah. But yes, there's lots of central banks that have liaison programs. Yeah. And we actually get together each year to try to work out how we can learn from one another. What one central bank might do. Yeah. How they use their information, how it's useful to them in either their policy analysis or their forecasting, and see how we can adopt from one another. So there's a good collaboration across central banks there.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It's something that, I love having conversations, and it's a great way that I find across, the work that I do and the work that other people do, that, sometimes you can get a lot of insights through the data, and the data quality we have in Australia is quite rich. But sometimes just having a conversation with someone adds so much additional value to some of those data insights.
Yeah. And conversation can be data too. So we take comprehensive notes of our meetings. We've been doing this for 20 years now, so we actually score more than 20 years. We score if you say your demand's gone up or down in prices. So we've created data series based on the strength of what you say, like, score out of 5, between 5 and -5, and those things. So we've created data, but at the same time we now have artificial, well, it's not quite AI, but a machine learning program that will look through our notes and actually be able to create sentiment indicators based on just the text of the discussions. And we can also use that to search or create word frequencies, and how much is people talking about trade uncertainty. Well, that's through the roof at the moment compared to in the past. But that way we can actually turn our conversations into data that we can analyze as well and visualize on charts, which we love, but also, anything else that people, have you heard about this? Or we can go back through and find out, actually, we've been hearing that a lot from, a range of firms in these kind of different areas. So, right.
Yeah. And so before this liaison, role and talking to a lot of different representatives, what other roles have you had at the RBA? We were talking about there's so many different pathways through the RBA. There's so many different things that the RBA is always working on and progressing for Australia. What could you give me an overview of some of the roles that you've had previously?
Yeah, so I've been at the RBA for 20 years coming up in February, and I certainly couldn't have stayed there if I hadn't had the opportunity to move around a lot and always do something different. So that's one of the things I've liked about the RBA, is just there's always opportunity to do something different and fresh. So I started out in Financial Stability Department just before the financial crisis hit. So that was a fascinating time to be there. It was looking at sort of the banking system, looking at it sort of the financials of the banking system and what kind of stresses there might have been at that time. But also there was an opportunity to look at what central banks overseas, how they were responding to the financial crisis. How could we learn from their responses if something had happened here where we were in a fairly good position in Australia at that time compared to what was happening, say, in the UK or the US. But, what were the central banks over there doing? How could that apply in our Australian legislative framework? How could we respond if we had needed to? And so that was a pretty fascinating time there. I spent a lot of my time in the Economic Analysis Department. So I spent a little bit of time analysing East Asian economies. I spent a lot of my career in the prices, wages and labour market team, first actually doing the inflation forecasts and monitoring the inflation data and doing some research there, including back, it was like over a decade ago, but I was still looking at energy sector things and the energy price pressures, which is funny because I still am a little bit now and then actually sometime later become a manager in that team and ended up leading that team. So looking at the labour market side of things as well as the prices side of things and wage pressures. And then, I also spent some time in financial markets. So the domestic financial markets department where I was, some parts of that department are responsible for implementing monetary policy, but I was more on the side where we work out how monetary policy is flowing through the economy. So I spent time as the manager of a section that looks at, what's actually happening to banks' interest rates, what's happening to their credit flows, etc., so that we could see, what financial conditions are like. Our interest rate affects all the other interest rates in the economy. How's that flowing through? And then for a while I headed up the securities market section, but looks at bonds and equity markets and funding conditions for businesses in those wholesale markets. Lots of different options there across financial markets, financial stability, and just sort of more core economics that you would things that would come to mind when you instantly think of the Reserve Bank or macroeconomic policy.
Get insights into how monetary policy affects them and what's inflation, why is that important, and what is monetary policy? Because I understand it's quite a broad term, but I think it's really interesting to understand what it is and as best as you can explain it during a podcast episode.
One of the goals of the RBA, as I mentioned before, is to keep price stability. So to keep inflation low and stable. So that it's in the background. You don't really have to think about it. You don't need to think about how much prices are going to go up next year to be able to think about, what do I have to do to budget for that? Or it's supposed to just be in the background. So we want to keep prices low and stable, but we want to be able to do that in a way that there's still, we talk about full employment. We want people to be able to get a job easily that are looking for one in a reasonable amount of time. So to keep the economy stable like that, the key tool that we have is the cash rate, which is one interest rate that we control that then influences all the other interest rates in the economy.
Right. Okay.
And so when there's lots of different ways that monetary policy transmits through the economy. But interest rates affect people's decisions to save or to spend. And so, if the economy is growing too quickly and prices are starting, there's too much demand, putting upward pressure on prices, inflation is starting to pick up. Higher interest rates give people an incentive to save save now. There's lots of different channels through which it works. A bit maybe much. I don't know how much you want to go into.
Yeah,
Not
no,
a podcast,
it's just
podcast, but that will get people to spend a little bit less now, save a little bit more, pulls back on demand, and then reduces some of those upward price pressures, bringing inflation back towards target.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just, I find it fascinating because when I was going through high school, I would see a lot of the, information about there's been a change in the rate or whether the rate's remaining stable. And then you always see in the news, there's different perspectives on all of those things. But I think it's sometimes important to understand, how those things impact in the economy. And as you were saying, they do impact every individual in the country in some way or shape or form, even if sometimes we might not think we're directly being impacted by these decisions.
Yeah, well, the most obvious one is, when mortgage rates go up.
Yes.
Then the people who've got mortgages have got less money to spend on other things. And so they're pulling back on their consumption or their household spending. But at the same time, there's people out there who've got savings. So that's helped, encouraging maybe to keep their savings there because they've got earning interest on that. But, it also affects the economy in other ways too, like, a higher interest rate in one country makes that a more attractive destination relative to other countries. So that influences the exchange rate,
Yes.
demand shifts. Their interest rates can affect their asset values and then for people's wealth, and then decisions like that. So one of the things that's fascinating about economics is that it helps you step through all these different channels. When interest rates change, we call it the transmission of monetary policy. There's lots of explainers if someone's interested in that on our website to go through all the different channels. But it just helps you, give you a framework for stepping through how things impact. How one change here impacts another change there.
Exactly. And so that's a great overview of the RBA and your roles. And so whilst you've been at the RBA, have you had an opportunity to pursue study? Has the RBA supported you in that? And would just be very interested in to hear about whether you've undertaken further study.
I was very fortunate after being at a bank for several years to receive their postgraduate study award to go and study, which is the Reserve Bank provides a few of those each year to staff to be able to go and learn somewhere else and then bring that knowledge back to the RBA and be able to use that to enhance our work. So, I went to study a Masters of Public Administration at MPA at London School of Economics in economic and public policy. It allowed me to do some core economics subjects that would have been in there if you'd just done a straight Masters of Economics, but also adding a bunch of public policy things that helped. Like I studied a course on financial regulation. I studied some more things about practical assessment of economic studies and policy evaluation. So it was really helpful to be able to go back to study after having had some work experience, because I went back with a different lens of what I would learn, what I wanted to brush up on, how I could practically apply what I was learning.
Yeah, and as part of that degree, you were with people from a broad range of academic backgrounds, I imagine, people from all over the world. And what can you tell me more about what that experience was like? It was in London as well, so that's a global city as well. So
yeah, it was fantastic. It was very a great and broadening experience for me. So both my course was mostly professionals, people had spent some time, but from all around the world coming back to study economic policy after that time, after some time in the workforce. So it was great to meet people from so many different countries and areas. I also lived at an international postgraduate college called Goodenough College there, and they have international students in different disciplines all across the world too. And so it was great to be able to meet people, doing their PhD in different medical and science fields, etc. So be able to, broaden out my experience and understanding of the world through getting to know them. So I really enjoyed that. It's great to live in London. It's a great city. It's fantastic to be able to use that as a base to travel as well, to the extent that I had time between the summer between courses.
Yeah,
because it was a pretty intense course. But it was very very useful. And useful, there's a practical element to it as well. So there's opportunity to do like a capstone course, which is like a group a group project for an international organization. So we did something for UNESCO in Paris.
Wow.
And that was a sort of way of sampling, doing public policy type analysis for something that wasn't central banking. So that was kind of a great experience.
Yeah, 100%. It's always great to get different perspectives, I think, on the ways of thinking. And sometimes that's, talking to people from a range of different academic backgrounds, people who are working in different spaces, because it makes your understanding of the world and the economy as well so much broader.
And different policy contexts, both in that course and also on some of the international central bank courses that I've been on, just understanding, the way we do things here in Australia. We've got really, really good data set from the ABS, which is not available everywhere. Central banking in developing economies can be quite different in terms of the information available and just the context. And it's helpful to understand. I think sometimes you can, if just being in one country all the time, you can take sort of things for. I felt like I'd probably taken some of the conditions around us for granted.
Yeah.
But it was helpful to think through again. I mean, one of the things I've loved about economics is just helping you to question your own assumptions.
Yes.
And think through, why do I think this is the case? And I think going overseas, working with people who are working in different policy contexts as well, helps me question even more of my assumptions and go, oh, I always took that as being a given, but actually maybe it was only working because of that particular context. So
yeah, exactly. And so following on that theme, what sort of skills do you think doing economics in a range of different contexts? You did it at university, and then you did it throughout your career, then you did some postgrad study, and then you were in a range of different teams at the RBA. And so that's so many different ways in which you've applied economics in different circumstances. So what do you think are the real skills and the benefits of being an economist and being able to think with that economic toolkit that we sometimes refer to?
Yeah. There's so much value in the economic toolkit, I guess, in just providing you with some frameworks to think through things. Even the idea that you should have a framework to think through this. If this happens, then that will happen. That sort of thinking about things in terms of we call it general equilibrium, which not everyone who listens to this might know, but if I do this, how will you respond? How will the other players respond? What are the incentives, etc.? Those sorts of things. Giving you a framework and a way of describing those interactions that you can communicate and think through. University was very good with that. It was also really good with some of the skills around statistical analysis, which I found really helpful when reading, everything from in the news to medical studies. Is that a good study? Where are the, are they actually identifying the effects that they claim to be identifying? That was really helpful too. So a lot of that, I think that gave a good basis in my studies. And then we're always thinking about real world problems.
Yes.
But then coming to work, questioning even gives you sort of the practical idea. Like some of that is a stylized example of how the world works. But then when you actually get into the workplace, there's, you sort of think about, well, where do some of those assumptions actually apply and not?
Yeah.
It gives you that practical edge, which I actually think the business liaison program does as well. It gives you the idea of how do businesses actually react in practice. And economics gives you a framework for thinking through those reactions. But there's more to it than that. And so that's been a really valuable thing, I think, as an economist to see the theory come together with practice and reality. So, and then I think other things working on, I think when you're in uni and maybe in high school too, you write lots of essays and it can explain things. You've got lots of time to explain it and show as much as you know. In business and in public policy, explaining things clearly and briefly is of the essence. That's probably something I learned more on the job.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, exactly. It's such a rewarding career, I feel, and you get to work on so many different types of problems, and it really depends. You can choose your own path as well, as you've said that you've been at the RBA, but you have experienced so many different streams and worked on so many different challenges and responded to so many different changing circumstances. You talked about the GFC, the global financial crisis. Then there's been, changes in trade policy over time. And then in 2020, we had the coronavirus pandemic as well. And so how have you found the ability to respond to things through, your experience and being at the RBA as well? How have you found the entire ability to apply your skills to help Australia respond and react to these dynamic situations?
Yeah. Well, these are all, they're all big episodes and are very worrying, particularly for lots of the individuals that are impacted, but they're fascinating from an intellectual standpoint for an economist. So it's really been interesting times to be there. I've always been really encouraged by the RBA, my colleagues, just wanting to serve and help wherever we can. And so the people pulling together in those crisis times to try to work out what can we do best to help in these situations. So it was really interesting to be in financial stability at the start of the GFC, watching things unfold overseas, trying to work out very quickly what can we learn from how other countries are responding, where are our vulnerabilities, how can we best help there. And it was kind of, I was only 2-3 years into my career at that point. That was really exciting to see how even right at the early stage of a career, who'd be involved in those discussions at quite a high level, and you could see how my small bit of work was contributing to the broader actual policy outcomes. So that was really fun. Even though it was like a stressful time for so many.
Exactly.
I was actually on maternity leave for most of the COVID period, and I extended my maternity leave through that. So, but I know for my colleagues, that it was very hard for people to suddenly have to go and work from home and try to work out how can we support the economy during this period. But they all pulled together through that. And then, more recently, such a fascinating time with what's happening with trade policy. So many interesting questions. We've got a really great scenario analysis team now that does, can try to think through. We don't just do our central forecast, but we think through different scenarios of what happens if this happened and what happens in another situation. So in our statement of monetary policy last quarter, we had like a trade war and a trade peace scenario under what if the trade, situation was this bad, and what if it actually turned out to be this? How would the forecast be different to what our central forecast is? And so just these sorts of periods of volatility in the world means you can apply your economic theory in to real world problems in a new and really relevant way. So trade policy stuff, some people haven't been thinking about that for decades, but there's this whole plethora of work out there that can be refreshed. So a fascinating time to be an economist, particularly if you want to do research, to think about how some of that, dust off some of those old theories and frameworks and how that applies now.
Yeah, I find that really interesting what you talk about in terms of scenario analysis. And I think it's just an important skill throughout our lives. Like, this is the general pathway we think something's going to go, but it's always really valuable to be able to understand, well, if things go another way, what would that look like? And I think that's a really important skill that economics teaches us. And at the RBA, you apply and you live that through providing different scenarios on all of your models. So that's a really interesting way to look at the world, I think, generally as well.
Yeah, and with our liaison, we can also add to those teams and be like, firms are telling us they're worried about this particular outcome, or they're maybe telling us it could be this or it could be that, and these are the other things they're thinking about, which is because they're the ones that actually is really going to impact their business, or maybe it's not impacting their business as much as one might have thought. And so it's really helpful to be able to put that practical lens over what the models would say is going to happen if this happens to trade policy.
Yeah, and actually, before you were talking about how in the coronavirus period when COVID-19, you took some time off and you were able to really engage with your family a lot more. And can you tell me more about your life, the work-life balance in particular in your career, and how you've found the career path that you've taken? You working at the RBA has supported being able to, balance your work and your life and really make sure that you're getting what you want to out of your career and your life?
Yep. So I took 2 periods of parental leave. I took 1 year off with my son and then went back to work. And then I took A bit over 2 years in the end, during COVID, when my daughter was born. So it was, the bank has been very supportive through that time. I was able to come back to work part-time after both maternity leaves. I only just started back full-time this year. I had a fantastic job share with another mum for a number of years. So the bank has been really supportive. During that time too, while I was in and out of the workforce for a bit, I'd still be able to progress my career. So I was actually promoted while a bit way on maternity leave and delayed my return a little bit. And the bank was very supportive about, and they're very supportive of parental leave for both men and women.
Yes.
Making sure that they hold on to staff and provide for people to be able to have time with their family and time with work. And be able to contribute to Australia in that way as well as in their personal lives.
Exactly. And I think it's something that we're both very passionate about making sure the people who are, coming into economics are truly representative of the Australia that we see when we're out and about, as well, and really making sure we have people from all different backgrounds, all different ages, because it just makes the decision-making process and the impact that we can have through our career and just generally a lot more beneficial, and ensure that people are able to really untap and unleash their potential, because as you were referring to earlier, you're really inspired by the ability to contribute to Australia's prosperity. And so more generally, do you think it's important to ensure that we do have a lot of different types of faces in economics, and make sure we get people from a broad cross-section of society in our field?
Absolutely. And that's why I was excited to be part of this podcast, and why the Reserve Bank was so supportive of us being part of this podcast, because we really want to make sure, and that the Reserve Bank's got a public economics team, which I know that you know about as well, that are really trying to promote the study of economics across Australia, so that we have a broad pool of people that we can draw on to be able to contribute at the Reserve Bank, but in economic policy in general, that represent all of Australia, not just a particular a particular stream of Australia. So not all schools offer economics. Not all, it's more commonly offered in private schools than it is in public schools, which both of us are from.
Yes.
And so we're very much keen to make sure that as many people have the opportunity to study that, and very keen to be able to hire and promote people from all sorts of parts of Australia, all sorts of walks of life, that help us to be able to make sure that those who are making policy are representative of those who we're making policy for.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's something that I think, we're very aligned on, and the Economic Society of Australia, the RBA, and I think a lot of policymakers in general are really inspired about ensuring the next generation of across every field, not just in economics, are truly representative of our society. And I was interested in what you were saying before about making sure that people understand that there's different ways that you can apply economics. So, you can do an economics degree, but you don't have to necessarily become an economist, a quote unquote economist, which is very broad in particular. But there's so many different pathways. I think we can both agree. You talk to so many people in your role, and you were telling me about earlier that there's so many people that you wouldn't even think have done economics degrees, or they've even done economic subjects and found it very useful. Can you tell me more about that, about the amount of different options that economics opens up for you?
Yeah, so I interview businesses across all different types of industry, from mining to retail to hospitality, manufacturing, the community services sector, the homelessness sector, etc. It's just surprising how many of I'm mostly talking to like the heads of the organizations, the CEOs and CFOs, but so many of them, I did economics back in the day. And yet they're working in such diverse fields.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily working as an economist, but they usually talk about economics and, it's demand and supply. They reference the concepts that, help them to understand, speak the same language as us, understand how the economy and how policy is working.
Yeah.
So it's useful in that, but economics is just useful in so many other areas of life. So I was talking to my colleagues earlier about, behavioral economics and how much I've learned from that. And some of that comes from psychology, but in economics as well, how you make decisions, what are my assumptions? Am I where are my biases, etc. That sort of framework of thinking, so you can work behavioral psychology and health economics.
Yes.
There's economists or using economics backgrounds in, it's not just the finance industry.
Yeah.
There's heaps of different industries where these this background is useful. So it's useful to add an economics subject or two to any degree, I think, where you can. It doesn't have to be, it's not the same as business studies, but I think a lot of people think it's basically the same as business studies. Economics is different. It adds to business studies, but you can add it to lots of different things that will just give you an understanding of, when you're reading the news, when you're understanding why policymakers are doing what they're doing, understanding the implications of policies. Like, sometimes people will, think about adding in an extra regulation to protect people, but thinking about the cost-benefit analysis of that. There's lots of things you could apply it to, both in the public sector, but also in private sector and other areas of life too.
Exactly. Yeah, and you see sometimes across the internet and economics being applied to so many different areas, and the environment, and even things as diverse as sport and the entertainment industry. So there's really, because it does just provide you with a way of understanding and interrogating the world as well, I think is something that's really it's exciting to be able to understand different parts of how the world work.
Yeah, well, the game theory part of economics might help you win more board games, or understand how to better design a computer game. There's lots of different areas that you can use economics.
Yeah, and going off that, so where do you see the future of economics in the term that sometimes you see in the news, things like, artificial intelligence is coming, there's a different trade policy, there's a lot of movement across the world, and technology is improving. And how do you see economics fitting in with that? What do you see the role of being an economist? So actually, to put it really frankly, if I'm currently in high school and I'm looking at doing economics, will my skills and be useful moving forward? And how do you think you can think about those sort of things when you're looking at doing something like an economics degree, for example?
Great question. I think, there'll definitely be jobs for economists in future. I just see all the interesting research questions. Like, I feel like it's a great time to go into economics, and the world's changing, because these are all these areas you could research. What is the impact of AI going to be on the labour market, on how we organise ourselves, on the policy outcomes? But hopefully, AI will make it more fun to be an economist. Some of those routine tasks that we have to do now, aggregating data, fixing our code, hopefully those more tedious tasks will be done by AI, but we'll always need a human to ask the questions, to make the decisions, to make the trade-offs in policy. And economics will give you a good framework for thinking through how to make those decisions, thinking through not what to think, but a framework for how to assess things, how to assess information. AI might do a bit of the forecasting one day, but you'll need to think about what information it's using, or there's just so much extra research, and actually I think it opens the opportunities. And with trade policy and uncertainty, there's so many more interesting things like economists can look into, can help advise on optimal things, optimal policy, optimal decisions. It's a great time, an exciting time to be an economist. There's so much interesting questions out there that economics can help answer.
Exactly. And if you're doing an economics degree, then as you were referring to in your honours, there's the opportunity to do some further research and understand some of these questions, because you do have that flexibility to say, okay, I find this trend or something that's emerging at the moment and really be able to apply your skills and your research and really develop those research skills to see how you can apply and understand how that particular effect or that question will impact, different parts of the economy in general.
Yeah, and I remember when we were talking earlier, like you're focusing more on microeconomics in some ways. Like there's also new markets that are emerging as the economy changes, and how do they work? Do they actually change? Are there any principles and sort of around the structure of the economy that's changing? What are those the implications of that for how we do business, or how people organize themselves, or how resources are allocated? Those questions are all still out there.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's in economics we always talk about cycles and how there's sometimes just a process that the economy goes through, and there's sometimes more headwinds or some tailwinds for some parts of the economy, but it's quite a large system, and so sometimes it's one answer or one way of approaching things can be quite suitable at one point, but that can really change over time. And I think your experience at the RBA, the conversation we've had today, it really talks about how it helps you respond to the cycles and the changing dynamics over time.
Yeah, and one question we often ask ourselves, but it's interesting with these other policy issues that are outside the RBA's remit too, is what can we learn from economic history? What some of these things they're new and they're different, but there are parallels in the past. Well, what from then, and how policy reacted in the different situation there, and how it flowed through the economy then. What can we learn from that? What's going to be different this time? Such an interesting questions to debate and discover.
Exactly, yeah. And it's been great to understand actually your experience and the different roles that you've played and all the different experiences that you've had. What's one piece of advice that you would have for someone who's, in that late high school stage, considering the range of degree options or further study that they could pursue? What's one piece of advice you would have for them, and a reason that you would encourage them to study economics?
Keep an eye out for economics all around you. So in the news that you read, in the discussions that you have, if you look out for it, it's there. And if you can add in a little bit of study into whatever you're doing, add an economic subject or two, explore it. Because that, for instance, what is economics? I don't know what that is. I wasn't interested in it initially, but then thinking about political science, economic globalization, what is that? Actually, this is a really interesting way to think about the impact of globalization on the world.
Yes.
And then taking it from there. So just explore that curiosity, follow it, see where it leads you.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, for being so generous with your time. I'm sure our listeners have gotten so many insights and so many interesting perspectives on the ways that you can apply economics. And as we've discussed as well, there's not just one path that you can follow. You can become an economist, but there's so many different avenues and doors that doing an economics degree opens for you. So thank you so much for your generosity again. And it's great for our listeners to generally understand your experiences and learn more about the Reserve Bank of Australia and what the Reserve Bank does as well, and how the Reserve Bank really impacts everyday Australians in so many different ways. So thank you for being so wonderful with your insights today.
Thank you, Sabi, and thanks for doing everything that you're doing to encourage students to study economics and make sure that those who are working in economics can be representative of all of Australia. Thank you.
Thank you.